The wind howls across the Montana plains, and it carries more than just cold. It carries secrets, a grieving father, a hopeful child, and a woman arriving with a hidden past tied to blood and betrayal. One decision, one letter, one prayer is about to change all their lives forever. Stay with this story, because what begins as a simple wish turns into something far more dangerous. If you felt the weight of this story, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, share it, and subscribe for more unforgettable journeys.
The wind out here in Montana, it doesn't just blow, it bites. Monday morning. It was always a Monday. Caleb Dunn stepped out the back door of his cabin. His boots crunched heavy on the autumn frost. He didn't look at the mountains. He didn't look at the sky. He looked straight at the ground. He walked behind the smokehouse, stopped in front of a small, rough-cut stone. It just read, Mary. 1881, no last name, no pretty Bible verses. Just the truth. Caleb knelt down. His knees popped in the cold. He placed a single bruised wildflower on the hard dirt. 22 months. He had kept his oath for exactly 22 months. Mary told him, right before the winter fever finally took her breath, and she told him, "Don't let our daughter grow up with a ghost for a father. If you have to cry, Caleb, you cry alone." So he did. He cried out here, in the freezing dawn, when the sun was too low to see his face. And when he walked back inside that house, he locked the grief away. He became the father Mary asked him to be. But you can only hide so much from a 7-year-old. Sunday night, just the night before. Caleb had been walking down the hallway, the old floorboards creaking under his weight. He stopped right outside Lucy's door. It was cracked open, just an inch. She was kneeling by her narrow bed, her small hands folded tight against her forehead. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "it's Lucy Dunn again." Caleb closed his eyes. He leaned the back of his head against the wall. "I know I asked last Sunday," the little girl said, "and the Sunday before that. But Papa's getting thinner, and he only laughs when he thinks I'm not looking." A pause, a shaky, jagged breath. "Please, send us a new mama. She doesn't have to be pretty. I don't care about that. She just has to know how to braid hair and not be afraid of the grave behind the smokehouse. Amen." Caleb didn't walk in. He couldn't. 14 weeks. She had whispered that exact same prayer for 14 weeks. He just stood there in the dark. A man who used to stare down outlaws, completely helpless against a little girl's broken heart. Monday afternoon, the town of Cedar Flat. Caleb sat across a heavy oak desk from Banker Harrison. The room smelled like expensive cigars and cheap promises. $340, Caleb, Harrison said. He didn't even bother looking up from his ledger. 90 days. That's when the note is due. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Winter's coming, Harrison. You know I can't sell the cattle now. If I sell now, me and the girl starve in the spring." Harrison finally looked up. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then I guess the bank takes the land." Harrison wanted that acreage. He wanted it for his boy. Caleb knew it. The whole damn town knew it. Caleb stood up. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just turned around and walked out, his hands balled into tight fists inside his coat pockets. He stopped at the post office before riding out. Mrs. Pruitt was waiting at the counter. She handed him the mail with a look. You know the look. The kind that says she read the front, the back, and held the envelope up to the sunlight to see what was inside. "Letter for you, Mr. Dunn," she said, her voice practically dripping with curiosity. "From Denver." Caleb frowned. He didn't know a single soul in Denver. He stepped outside onto the wooden boardwalk, torn the seal open. The handwriting inside was neat, elegant. "To Mr. Caleb Dunn, in response to your advertisement of September 14th. Caleb stopped reading. The autumn wind whipped the paper in his hands, but he didn't feel the chill. An advertisement? He read on. Widower, with one daughter, age 7, seeks kind woman to be wife and mother, must be patient, honest, and willing to live simply. Ranch life. Montana. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He rode home fast, faster than usual. That night, after he tucked Lucy in and listened to her steady breathing, he went to her small wooden desk. He pulled open the drawer. There it was, a piece of crumpled, lined paper, written in clumsy, oversized letters. The draft of an ad, signed Caleb Dunn. And underneath that, in parentheses, written by his daughter because Papa's handwriting is too sad. He checked her tin savings bank, empty. Her $5 of Christmas money, gone. Sent off to pay for a spot in the Denver Matrimonial Gazette. Caleb sat down heavily on the floorboards. He looked at the letter in his hand, signed by a woman named Eliza Marlowe. She wrote that if he didn't reply to stop her, she would arrive on the noon stagecoach. Come Sunday. He had 30 days. 30 days to write back and tell her no. 30 days to stop a complete stranger from stepping off a carriage and into their lives. He could burn the letter right now. He could pretend it got lost in the mail. He stared at the elegant ink for a long, quiet time. Then he stood up. He walked slowly into the kitchen. He didn't throw the letter in the fire. Instead, he smoothed it out, and he placed it right in the dead center of the kitchen table, right where Lucy would see it when the sun came up. He wasn't going to make the choice. He was going to let his daughter decide. Denver was loud, too loud. Carriages rattling over cobblestones, men shouting over the screech of the rail yards. It was a city that never stopped moving, never stopped building over its own dirt. Eliza Morrison sat in her rented room, 3rd floor, overlooking a street she didn't care to know the name of. The room was small, stifling, but it was quiet. She sat at a narrow desk, a cup of black tea gone cold beside her elbow. In front of her lay the Denver Matrimonial Gazette. She wasn't looking for a husband. Lord, no. She was looking for a way in. A ghost door into a town called Cedar Flat. For 6 months she had been pulling strings, quietly, through a lawyer named Greer. She had purchased a debt, $340, the mortgage note for a ranch in the Montana Territory. She had sent 2 letters to that ranch, offering her services, first as a bookkeeper, then as a tutor. Both letters went unanswered. The man who owned that ranch didn't want help. He didn't want strangers. He had built a wall around himself, and she couldn't find the gate. Until today. Her finger traced down the 2nd column of the Gazette, the cheap newsprint staining her skin. She stopped, her breath hitched. Just for a second. There it was. Widower with 1 daughter, age 7, seeks kind woman to be wife and mother. Must be patient, honest, and willing to live simply. Ranch life. Montana. And then, the name. Caleb Dunn, Cedar Flat. Eliza stared at the letters. Caleb Dunn. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. This was the man. The man she had spent the last 4 years hating. The man who wore a silver star in Oregon and used it to end her brother's life. And he was looking for a wife, a mother for his little girl. She read the ad again. The phrasing was strange, clumsy. It didn't sound like a hardened former deputy. It didn't sound like a killer. It sounded innocent. Too innocent. It didn't matter. It was the gate she had been looking for. Eliza opened her desk drawer. She pulled out a heavy wax-sealed envelope. Inside was the mortgage deed. Caleb Dunn's debt. He didn't know it, but Eliza held the paper that could take his home. She had used her inheritance to buy it. Not to collect the money, no. To get close. To look him in the eye. To see if he was the monster she believed him to be. And if he was, she was going to finish what her brother's death started. She was going to take everything he had left. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from her stack, dipped her pen in the inkwell. She didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to. She began to write. Dear Mr. Dunn, I understand that a ranch life is demanding. I do not seek luxury. I seek purpose. She lied smoothly. beautifully. She wrote that she was an orphan, a former schoolteacher. No family to speak of. No ties to anything, just a woman looking for a quiet life. She signed it with a name that wasn't hers. Eliza Marlowe. Marlowe was her mother's maiden name, close enough to remember. Far enough from Morrison to keep her safe. If you will have me, I can be in Cedar Flat by Sunday, October 1st. I will arrive on the noon stagecoach. If you do not wish to proceed, send word to the Denver postmaster by the 25th, and I will not come. She blew on the ink, watched it dry. It was a trap, a perfectly laid trap. Somewhere in Montana, a little girl had prayed for a mother, and because of that prayer, she had just invited the wolf right up to her front door. The 25th of September came and went. No letter of rejection arrived at the Denver post office. He had accepted, or at least he hadn't said no. Eliza began to pack. She didn't pack like a bride. She packed like a soldier heading to the front lines. 3 modest dresses, wool skirts, heavy boots, a sewing machine. And right at the bottom of her leather trunk, beneath the petticoats and the winter cloaks, she placed the deed to his ranch. Next to it she laid a small journal, brown leather, worn at the edges. She opened it to the very first page. Caleb Dunn, she had written years ago. Former deputy, Silver Falls, Oregon. Dismissed November 1879 after the death of Robert Morrison. Relocated Cedar Flat, Montana, spring 1880. Wife Mary Dunn, died January 1881. Daughter Lucy, born 1875. She closed the book, latched the trunk. The stagecoach ride took days. Days of bruising roads, choking dust, and relentless wind. The landscape changed from the bustling streets of Denver to the vast, empty plains of Wyoming, and finally to the jagged, looming mountains of the Montana Territory. The air grew colder, thinner. Eliza sat by the window, watching the golden grass blur past. For 4 years, her anger had been a fire that kept her warm. It was simple. Robert was her brother. Caleb Dunn killed him. Caleb Dunn was a monster. But as the coach drew closer to Cedar Flat, a strange, quiet doubt began to creep into her mind. She remembered the words in the ad. Must be patient, honest. She was neither. Not right now. She was riding into a man's home under a false name, to judge him, to break him, or to clear his name. She didn't know which outcome she wanted more. She looked out at the sprawling, lonely country. I am going to find the truth, she whispered to the empty glass. And I will not let my heart get in the way. The carriage rattled on. Up ahead, through the autumn mist, she saw the outline of buildings, wood smoke rising into the pale blue sky, Cedar Flat. And off in the distance, cutting through the crisp air, the slow, steady ringing of a church bell. It was Sunday morning. Caleb hadn't slept in 6 days. Not really, just dozed in a chair by the fire, waking up every time the wind howled against the cabin walls. Ever since he left that letter on the table, everything had changed. Lucy had found it. Of course she did. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't thrown a fit. She had just looked at him with those wide, serious eyes. Her mother's eyes. She begged. She promised to do all her chores. She promised never to lie again. But she wouldn't let him send the woman away. Papa, is it God? She had asked. Did God hear me? What does a man say to that? So he made a deal with her, and with himself. One time, he told her. We meet her one time. If she's kind, she stays 30 days. A trial. If she's not, she gets right back on that coach and goes to Denver. Understood? Lucy nodded, grave as a judge. And now here they were, Sunday morning. Caleb stood in front of the small mirror in his bedroom. He was wearing his best shirt. It wasn't new. The collar was frayed, but he had scrubbed it raw. He didn't want to impress the woman. He just didn't want to look like a man who had given up. He walked out to the main room. Lucy was waiting by the door. She wore her Sunday dress. The hem was a little short. She was growing fast. Her hair was brushed until it shined, though the braids he managed were lopsided. In her hands, she clutched a small, messy bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers, the purple petals already drooping a little. "You ready?" he asked. His voice sounded like gravel. "Yes, Papa." They took the wagon into town. The stagecoach depot was right in the middle of Cedar Flat, next to the saloon and across from the mercantile. It was 11:45. Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. He tied the reins, lifted Lucy down from the seat. He stood there, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, looking down the road. He hated this, every piece of it. He hated the vulnerability. He hated that half the town was watching them from their porches, whispering behind their hands. "There's Dunn, waiting on a mail-order bride. Must be desperate." He ignored them. He only cared about the little girl standing next to him, gripping those wildflowers like a lifeline. Dust rose on the horizon. Then came the rumble of the wheels, the crack of the driver's whip. The stagecoach pulled in, the horses blowing hard, lathered in sweat. The door opened. Caleb braced himself. He expected someone frail, someone beaten down by the world looking for a man to hide behind. That's not who stepped out. She wore a simple gray dress, travel-stained but neat. Her dark hair was pinned back tight, but it was her eyes that caught him. They weren't looking for salvation. They were sharp, clear, taking in the town, the depot, and finally, him. They locked eyes. Right then, Caleb knew. This woman wasn't running from something. She was carrying something. Eliza saw a tall man, lean, shoulders broad but tense. His face was weathered, lined with too much sun and too much grief. He didn't look like the monster she had built in her mind for 4 years. He looked tired. Before either of them could speak, Lucy let go of Caleb's leg. She marched right up to the woman. "Miss Marlowe?" Lucy's voice piped up, clear and bright. Eliza looked down. Her breath caught. "I'm Lucy," the girl said. "I'm the one who wrote the letter. Papa didn't know, but he said it's okay now. So, welcome to Montana." Lucy held out the crushed wildflowers. For the first time in 4 years, Eliza Morrison felt her hands shake. She reached out, took the flowers. Her fingers brushed the child's. "Thank you, Lucy," Eliza said softly. "They are beautiful." Caleb stepped forward. He didn't take off his hat. He didn't smile. "Mr. Dunn," Eliza said, looking up at him. "Miss Marlowe," Caleb replied. His voice was flat, guarded. "My wagon's over here. Let me get your trunk." The ride back to the ranch was heavy, 3 people on one wooden seat. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Lucy sat in the middle, Eliza on the outside. It didn't take long for the quiet to break. Lucy couldn't hold it in. "Do you know how to do a French braid?" Lucy asked, looking up at Eliza. "I do," Eliza said. "Are you afraid of snakes?" "Yes, but I know how to kill them with a shovel." Caleb's grip on the reins tightened just a fraction. He cut his eyes over to her. "A shovel." "Do you know how to read the Bible?" Lucy pressed on. "Since I was 5 years old," Eliza answered smoothly. "Are you afraid of the grave behind the smokehouse?" The wagon hit a rut. Caleb jerked the reins. The horses nickered. He went rigid. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. Eliza froze. The grave. She hadn't known about the grave. The journal in her trunk didn't say exactly where Mary was buried. She looked at Caleb's profile, hard as granite. Then she looked down at Lucy. She chose her next words very, very carefully. "I'm not afraid of graves, Lucy," Eliza said. Her voice was steady. "I'm afraid of forgetting. Graves are just there, so we remember." Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. He didn't look at her, but he heard it. It was the perfect answer. Too perfect, like she had rehearsed it. Nobody rehearses the truth, Caleb thought. And nobody practices a lie unless they've got something to hide. They pulled up to the cabin. Caleb carried her trunk inside. He set it down in the small guest room just off the kitchen. It used to belong to Lucy's nursemaid, back when things were whole. Eliza stood in the doorway, taking in the sparse room. "Before you unpack," Caleb said. He turned around. He filled the doorway, imposing, unmovable. "We need to get some things straight." Eliza lifted her chin. "I'm listening." 30 days, Caleb said, his voice low. "That's the trial. After 30 days, we decide if this works. Both of us." "Agreed." "You sleep in here, I sleep in the main room. My door stays shut. Yours does too. There is no touching, not of any kind." Eliza didn't flinch. "Agreed." "You manage the house, you manage Lucy. I manage the herd and the land. We don't cross lines." "Agreed." In front of the girl, it's Mr. Dunn and Miss Marlowe, no first names. "Understood." Caleb paused. He looked her dead in the eye. "And the last rule," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You don't ask about my past, and I won't ask about yours." Eliza held his gaze. For a split second, just half a heartbeat, she hesitated. "Agreed," she finally whispered. Caleb nodded once. He walked past her out into the kitchen. That night, after the cabin was dark and the wind had settled into a low moan, Caleb sat on the back porch. The air was freezing. He didn't care. He had his pencil. He had his ledger. He didn't use ink. He hadn't used ink in years. "Ink makes things permanent," he always told himself. "And I've learned the hard way that words shouldn't be permanent." He wrote by the moonlight. "She's here. Lucy is happy. I am not happy, but I am not sad either." She answered Lucy's questions too well, like a politician. "I don't trust her. I will watch her. Every move she makes. But I will be fair." He closed the ledger, looked out toward the smokehouse. Inside the cabin, in the small room off the kitchen, Eliza was awake. She stood by her bed. The lamp was blown out. She had opened her trunk, reached all the way to the bottom. Her fingers brushed the edge of the mortgage deed and the leather spine of her journal. She pulled them both out, slipped them underneath her mattress. Then she walked over to the door. She checked the latch. Once, twice, 3 times. She backed away into the dark. The 30 days had begun. 2 weeks. That's how long it took for the rhythm of the Dunn Ranch to settle into Eliza's bones. It was a hard rhythm, unforgiving. Up before the sun, the bitter cold seeping through the floorboards, lighting the stove, boiling the water, making the biscuits. She did exactly what Caleb hired her to do. She swept the dust that never seemed to stop blowing in. She washed the clothes until her knuckles cracked and bled. She brushed Lucy's hair every morning, tying it back with ribbons that had seen better days. And she watched. She watched Caleb Dunn. He was a man of strict routine. He worked the herd until his shoulders slumped. He fixed the fences, he chopped the wood, he rarely spoke. When he did, it was low, grunting mostly. But with Lucy, he was different. Sometimes, right after supper, when the plates were cleared and the fire was burning low, Eliza would see it. Lucy would tell a story about a stray dog she saw, or a strange-shaped cloud, and Caleb would stop. He would lean against the doorframe, and the corner of his mouth would twitch, just barely, an almost smile. He never let it reach his eyes, he never let it stay, but it was there. Eliza sat at the kitchen table late at night, after they were both asleep. She had taken over the ledger. Caleb's bookkeeping was a mess, numbers crossed out, pages torn. She fixed it. It was what she knew. It was what she used to do for her brother. She dipped her pen in the ink. She didn't write in the ledger. She opened her own brown leather journal. 14 days, she wrote. He does not drink. He does not yell. He treats the animals with a firm but gentle hand. He looks at his daughter like she is the only light left in a dying world. She stared at the words. They felt wrong. They didn't fit the monster she had come to destroy. She closed the journal, pushed it away. Sunday came around again. Their second Sunday together. Caleb hitched the wagon. They rode into Cedar Flat. The church was a simple, white-clapped building, cold inside. The pews were hard pine. When they walked in, the talking stopped. Not completely, just enough to notice. Eliza walked down the aisle holding Lucy's hand. Caleb walked a step behind them, a shadow guarding his own. Eliza wore a plain gray dress, nothing flashy, nothing to draw the eye. But she felt every stare in that room burning into her back. The preacher spoke about the book of Ruth, about the foreign woman who came to a strange land and found grace. A few heads nodded. A few women turned completely away. When the service ended, the real trial began. They stood on the church steps. Caleb was talking to Doc Harlan about a lame horse. Eliza stood with Lucy. That's when Mrs. Pruitt moved in, the postmistress, a woman who looked like she lived on sour milk and town gossip. "Miss Marlowe, isn't it?" Mrs. Pruitt said. Her smile was sharp as a tack. "Yes, ma'am," Eliza said calmly. "Settling in out there at the Dunn place? Must be terribly lonely. You're from Denver," the letter said. "I traveled from Denver, yes," Eliza answered. "Before that, Portland." Mrs. Pruitt's eyes lit up. "Portland? Well, isn't that something? I have a cousin in Portland. Which church did you attend?" Eliza didn't blink. She had prepared for this. "First Methodist, on Burnside Street. I taught Sunday school there." Mrs. Pruitt hummed a low, calculating sound. "First Methodist. I'll have to ask my cousin if she knows you." "Please do," Eliza said. Her voice never wavered. But out of the corner of her eye, she felt something else. Not Mrs. Pruitt's nosy interrogation. A different kind of stare. She turned her head slightly. Standing by the cemetery gate was a woman, dressed in widow's black, early 30s, pale. Clara Dunlop, Caleb's nearest neighbor. Clara wasn't glaring. She wasn't whispering to the other women. She was just looking at Eliza, studying her, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with a missing piece. Eliza looked back. For a long second, neither woman looked away. A shiver crawled up Eliza's spine. The kind you get when a storm is coming over the ridge and you don't have anywhere to hide. Monday morning. Caleb rode out to the far pasture. Eliza went into town for flour and sugar. She stopped at the post office. Mrs. Pruitt handed her a letter, addressed to E. Marlowe, postmarked Denver. It was from Greer, her lawyer. Eliza didn't open it in town. She waited until she was back at the ranch, sitting on her narrow bed. The door closed tight. She broke the seal. "Miss Morrison," the letter read, "I have located additional records regarding your late brother's estate. I found an Oregon state compensation claim, paid out in 1880 by the citizens of Silver Falls." Eliza frowned. Compensation? Paid to who? She read the next line. Her breath stopped in her throat. $2,000. Paid to Caleb Dunn, a settlement for wrongful dismissal. The records show Mr. Dunn has never touched the money. It has been sitting in the First National Bank of Portland for 2 years. If you can prove criminal intent in your brother's death, those funds may be recoverable. Eliza dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. $2,000. Caleb Dunn had $2,000 sitting in a bank in Oregon. That was a fortune. That was enough to pay off his ranch 5 times over. Enough to buy 100 head of cattle. Enough to hire hands, build a bigger house, buy Lucy new dresses. But he was letting banker Harrison threaten to take his land over a $300 note. Why? Why would a man starve himself? Why would a man let his daughter wear mended clothes when he had a fortune waiting for him? Because of where the money came from. It came from Silver Falls, the town that buried her brother. He wouldn't touch it. He refused it. Eliza's hands began to shake. Not a little tremble. A deep, bone-rattling shake. She fell to her knees beside her trunk. She threw open the lid, pushed past the heavy wool coats, past the dresses. She dug her fingers into the very bottom corner. She pulled out a small folded square of newspaper. Yellowed. Brittle. She hadn't unfolded it in 18 months. She hadn't needed to. She knew the words by heart. The Portland Oregonian. November 8th, 1879. The headline screamed in thick black ink. Deputy's brutality kills honest merchant. Silver Falls Tragedy. Underneath the headline, the author's name, Miss Eliza Morrison, sister of the deceased. She opened the paper. She forced her eyes to read the words she had written when she was 23 years old. She read the part where she called Caleb a murderer with a badge. She read the part where she demanded the town of Silver Falls rise up and demand justice against this butcher. 1,200 words of pure, unadulterated venom, written based entirely on the lies her brother had told her before he died. 3 days after that article printed, Caleb Dunn was fired. 2 weeks later, the town turned their backs on him. The stores wouldn't sell to him. The church wouldn't let his family sit in the pews. They were driven out, forced to run, to Montana. Eliza lowered the paper. The silence in the small room was deafening. She thought about the grave behind the smokehouse. Mary. Mary had died 6 months after they got to Cedar Flat, because Caleb didn't have time to prepare for the brutal Montana winter, because they were running, because they had nothing, because of the article. "Oh, God," Eliza whispered. The sound tore out of her throat like barbed wire. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, trying to hold back the sob. It didn't work. She collapsed against the edge of the bed, weeping. Not the quiet, dignified crying of a gentlewoman. She wept like a woman who had just realized her hands were covered in blood. She hadn't killed Robert, but she had helped kill Mary Dunn. She had come to Montana to find a monster, to ruin a man who had already lost everything, and she just realized she was looking in a mirror. She sat there on the floor for a long time, until the sun went down, until the cold crept back into the room. She didn't know whether she should stay and try to fix the broken man in the next room, or pack her bags in the dark and run before she broke him all over again. Sunday morning, the 3rd week, Caleb woke at 5 o'clock. His eyes opened in the dark. The habit was worn into him like a deep groove in a wagon trail. He laid there for a minute, listening to the house. He didn't hear the wind. He heard something else, the soft clinking of iron. He threw off the heavy quilt, pulled on his trousers and boots, walked out into the kitchen. The lamp was already lit, cast a warm yellow glow against the rough-hewn walls. Eliza was standing by the stove. She had already ground the beans. The coffee was boiling in the black tin pot. Caleb stopped in the doorway. For 22 months he had been the first one awake. For 22 months he had struck the match. He had boiled the water. He had sat in the quiet, drinking bitter coffee alone. Eliza turned around. She didn't look startled. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept a wink. She reached into the cupboard, pulled down 2 tin cups. She poured the coffee, black, steaming. She pushed 1 cup across the scarred wooden table. She sat down. Caleb walked over. He pulled out his chair. The wood scraped loud against the floor. He sat down across from her. They didn't say good morning. They just sat, the heat from the cups warming their hands. Outside, the thick Montana fog rolled in, pressing against the window glass. 10 minutes passed, just the sound of sipping, the crackle of the wood in the stove. Then Eliza spoke, the first words of the day. "Who was Mary?" Caleb froze. The cup stopped halfway to his mouth. His chest seized up, a sudden, violent reflex. "Rule number 5, his mind screamed. "You don't ask about my past." He could have yelled. He could have pointed at the door and told her to pack her trunk. He had the right. But he looked at her face. She wasn't prying. She wasn't gossiping like Mrs. Pruitt. There was a weight in her eyes, a heavy, sorrowful weight that he recognized, because he saw it in the mirror every morning. He lowered the cup, set it on the table. "My wife," Caleb said. His voice was a rasp, like dry leaves blowing across stones. Eliza didn't move. She waited. "She died the first winter we came to Cedar Flat," Caleb continued. He stared at his own hands. "Lung fever. The cold got into her chest and it wouldn't let go. There was no doctor, not within 40 miles. He swallowed hard. It felt like swallowing glass. "I left her with Lucy. Rode out to find Doc Harlan. Took me 3 days through the snow. When I got back, she was gone. Lucy was 5. The kitchen was dead silent. Eliza didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "It wasn't your fault." She didn't reach across the table to pat his hand. She knew better. She knew that any word she offered right now would just be cheap, smaller than the truth. She simply nodded her head. Once. Caleb looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time since she stepped off that stagecoach, he didn't see an intruder. He didn't see a stranger playing a part. He saw a human being. Someone who knew how to hold silence when the pain was too big for words. They went to church. They came home. Lucy ate a plate of cold ham and biscuits, then curled up on her bed for an afternoon nap. Caleb walked out to the porch. Eliza was standing there, looking out at the golden plains. The air was getting sharper. Winter was coming fast. Caleb cleared his throat. It felt awkward. He hadn't invited anyone to do anything in 2 years. "There's a creek," he said, looking out at the barn instead of her. "About half a mile south. Cuts through the ridge. It's pretty. If you want to walk?" Eliza turned her head. "I would like that." They walked. Not together, not side by side. He walked 3 paces ahead. She followed. They cut through the tall grass. It brushed against their boots, making a dry, shushing sound. The air smelled like wood smoke and damp earth. They reached the creek. The water was running fast, clear and freezing cold over smooth gray stones. Caleb sat down on a large boulder near the bank. Eliza found a fallen log a few yards away. She sat down, arranged her skirts, and that was it. They didn't talk about the ranch. They didn't talk about Lucy. They didn't talk about the rules. They just sat. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. The wind ruffled the water. A starling swooped down from a pine tree, landed on a rock, took a drink, and flew off again. The sun filtered through the yellowing leaves, casting long, peaceful shadows. It was the quietest Caleb's mind had been since the day he left Oregon. He didn't have to be strong. He didn't have to be angry. He just had to breathe. And Eliza? She sat on her log, watching the water rush by, letting the terrible, heavy guilt in her chest wash out for just a few moments. They sat there until the sun began to dip behind the mountains. Then Caleb stood up. Eliza stood up. They walked back to the cabin. Still 3 paces apart, still silent. But the silence wasn't a wall anymore. It was a bridge. When they got back to the house, Lucy was awake. Caleb took off his boots on the porch. He opened the back door, stepping into the kitchen. He stopped dead in his tracks. The late afternoon sun was pouring through the single window, bathing the room in a warm, honey-colored light. Eliza was sitting on a wooden chair. Lucy was sitting on the floor between Eliza's knees. Eliza had a brush in her hand. She was running it through Lucy's fine brown hair. Slow, gentle. Lucy was humming a little tune. Her head tilted back, her eyes half closed in pure contentment. Eliza's fingers moved expertly, parting the hair, twisting it into a thick, neat French braid. "There you go, little bird," Eliza murmured. Caleb couldn't breathe. It was Mary. That was exactly how Mary used to do it. Every Sunday afternoon, in that exact same chair, in that exact same light. The memory hit him so hard his knees actually buckled a fraction. A physical blow to the chest. He didn't make a sound. He stepped backward, out the door, closing it silently behind him. He almost ran to the barn. It was dark inside. Smelled of hay and manure and old leather. He walked all the way to the back stall, where the oldest horse stood, the roan mare that Mary used to ride. Caleb leaned his forehead against the heavy wooden post of the stall. He gripped the wood until his knuckles turned white. He didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come, just a dry, aching pressure behind his eyes. "Mary," he whispered into the dark. The horse nickered softly, bumping her soft nose against his shoulder. "Mary, I don't know if this is grace or if this is punishment." He closed his eyes. I don't know if she's going to stay. I don't even know if I want her to stay. I don't trust her, not yet. He swallowed. But our little girl laughed today, Mary. She laughed, and God help me I had forgotten what that sounded like. Monday morning. The frost was thick on the ground, crunching under Caleb's boots. He walked behind the smokehouse, stood in front of the small stone. He placed the wildflower down. He looked at the name, Mary. For the first time in 22 months, he didn't just stare in silence. He spoke to the stone. Her name is Eliza, he said, his breath pluming white in the freezing air. Lucy likes her. Lucy thinks God sent her. He put his hands in his pockets to keep them from shaking. I don't know what to do, Mary. I don't know how to do this. If you can hear me, if you're out there somewhere. He looked up at the pale morning sky. Just give me a sign. Any sign at all. He stood there for 5 minutes. Nothing happened. The wind blew. A crow called out from the tree line. No voice from the heavens, no sudden feeling of peace. Just cold dirt and a stone. Caleb sighed. A long, defeated sound. He turned around and walked back to the cabin. He stepped onto the porch, opened the heavy door. Eliza was standing right there in the entryway. She had a tin cup in her hand, steam rising from the dark liquid inside. She didn't say a word. She didn't smile. She just held the cup out to him. Caleb looked at the cup. Then he looked at her eyes. He reached out. As he took the tin cup from her grip, his rough, calloused fingers brushed against hers, just for a second, barely a touch, but it was warm. Caleb held the coffee. He walked past her into the kitchen. He took a sip. It was bitter and perfect. Maybe that was the sign, Caleb thought to himself. Or maybe it's just a cup of coffee. I don't know the difference anymore. Numbers don't lie. People lie. Letters lie. Even memories lie, if you give them enough time. But numbers? Numbers are just the truth written in ink. Eliza sat at the kitchen table. It was late. Caleb was out in the barn, checking a calf that was having trouble breathing. Lucy was asleep. The cabin was quiet, save for the crackle of the wood stove. Eliza had Caleb's ledger open. She had spent the last 3 weeks untangling the mess of his finances. He was a good rancher, but a terrible bookkeeper. She ran her finger down the column of figures, checking the interest on his loan with banker Harrison. She stopped, frowned. She ran the math again in her head. She was good at math. She had managed the books for her brother's business for years before everything fell apart. She took a blank piece of paper, wrote the principal amount, $340, calculated the interest rate. It didn't match. Harrison wasn't just charging high interest, he was cheating. It was systematic. $3 here, $5 there, added into the monthly carryover. Over 30 months, Harrison had manufactured an extra $127 of phantom debt. Caleb didn't owe $340, he only owed $213. Eliza set her pen down. A spark of triumph flared in her chest. She had him. She could take this to Caleb right now, prove Harrison was a fraud, save the ranch. But she stopped. If she told Caleb, she would have to explain how she knew. A simple school teacher from Portland wouldn't know how to spot compound interest fraud hidden in a bank ledger. A legal secretary would. She had to be careful. She decided she would point it out casually. Oh, Mr. Dunn, I was just adding up the columns and it seems the bank made a mistake. Yes, that would work. She pulled the ledger closer, flipped to the back pocket where Caleb shoved all his loose receipts and old mail. She wanted to organize it all, get a complete picture of the man she was trying to ruin. She pulled out a stack of postal money order receipts. They were worn, greasy from his thumbs. She smoothed the top one out. $5. Mailed from Cedar Flat. She looked at the date, every month, like clockwork. For the last 24 months, Caleb Dunn had been mailing a $5 postal order. To who? She squinted at the faded ink. The address was to a bank in Oregon. No, not a bank. Silver Falls Cemetery. Care of J. Meadows, groundskeeper. Eliza stopped breathing. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin, too hot. Silver Falls Cemetery. She knew that cemetery. She had stood in it, in the freezing rain, watching a cheap pine box get lowered into the muddy earth because the town refused to pay for a proper headstone for a disgraced man. Robert's grave. Caleb Dunn, the man the whole town believed had murdered Robert Morrison, was paying $5 a month to keep the weeds off Robert's grave. "No," Eliza whispered to the empty room. "No, that doesn't make sense." Her hands were shaking. She dug deeper into the pile of papers, ripping envelopes, tossing aside feed bills. She found a letter, heavy parchment, official seal, First National Bank of Portland, dated September 15th, 1882, just a few weeks ago. She unfolded it. The paper crinkled loud in the quiet kitchen. "Dear Mr. Dunn, this is our final notice regarding the balance of your account. The funds deposited by the state of Oregon amounting to $2,000 for your wrongful dismissal suit remain untouched. If you do not claim or transfer these funds, we will be forced to move the account into a holding status and apply maintenance fees." Eliza stared at the number. $2,000. It was a fortune. It was land. It was cattle. It was winter coats for his daughter. But at the bottom of the letter, in the margin, there was a note, written in Caleb's clumsy, heavy pencil lead, faded, like he had rubbed his thumb over it 100 times. "Money from the town that buried him. I won't touch it. When I die, send it to his family, anonymously." Eliza dropped the letter. She pushed away from the table so fast the chair tipped backward and hit the floor with a loud crack. She didn't care. She couldn't breathe. She backed up until her shoulders hit the rough timber of the cabin wall. She slid down to the cold floorboards. She pulled her knees to her chest, and she buried her face in her hands. The man she had accused of being a bloodthirsty killer. The man she had written a 1,200-word article about, demanding his ruin. He was starving himself. He was letting a corrupt banker threaten to take his home. He was letting his daughter wear patched boots in the snow. Because he refused to touch blood money, he had $2,000, and he'd rather die broke than spend a dime of it. Eliza didn't just cry. She shattered. Every lie she had told herself for the last 4 years cracked open and fell apart. She sat on the floor until her tears ran dry, until her eyes burned and her throat was raw. Then she stood up. She picked up the fallen chair. She walked over to her trunk in the guest room. She pulled out the brown leather journal. She walked out to the back porch. The night air was freezing. She didn't have a shawl. She didn't care. She sat on the wooden steps. She opened the journal. She didn't write a report for her lawyer. She didn't write ammunition for a courtroom. She took her pen, and for the first time in 4 years, she wrote the truth. "I came here to find a criminal, a monster. I found a man who is paying to keep my brother's grave clean. I came here to take back what I believed he stole from my family. I found an account of $2,000 that he refuses to touch because the money is stained with my brother's memory. I came here to destroy a man. I found a father, raising a 7-year-old girl with calloused hands and a vow never to sit with his back to the door. Dear God, I don't know what to do." She stared at the wet ink. "If I tell the truth, I lose him. If I stay quiet, I lose myself. There is a third choice. I could leave, tear up the mortgage note, disappear into the night, let him live the rest of his life not knowing who I am. But that is a coward's way. And Lucy would wake up tomorrow and ask where Miss Marlowe went. And Caleb would just have another lie added to the list of lies he has endured. I don't know. For the first time in 4 years, I don't know." She closed the book. The back door creaked open. Eliza jumped. Lucy stood there in her long white nightgown, rubbing her eye with a little fist. "Miss Marlowe?" the girl murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Papa said we're having beef stew tomorrow. Can I help you cut the carrots?" Eliza looked at the little girl, the child who had prayed for her to come. Eliza swallowed the lump in her throat. She forced a soft, steady smile. "Yes, sweetheart," Eliza whispered. "I would love that. Let's get you back to bed." She took the little girl's hand. Eliza Morrison wasn't going anywhere. Winter didn't arrive in Cedar Flat. It ambushed it. The first snow blew in hard on a Tuesday afternoon, driving sideways, stinging the skin like crushed glass. Doc Harlan's buggy rolled up to the cabin right as the sky started to turn an ugly, bruised purple. Caleb walked out to meet him, helping the older man tie off the horse. Doc said he was just passing through. Said he wanted to check on Lucy's cough before the roads got too deep to travel. Caleb knew better. Doc Harlan didn't make 10-mile house calls in a blizzard just for a tickle in a kid's throat. Doc checked Lucy, gave Eliza a bottle of horehound syrup. Then he walked back to the front door, pulling his heavy buffalo coat tight around his shoulders. Caleb stepped out onto the porch with him, pulling the door shut behind them. The wind howled through the porch beams. Doc didn't look at Caleb. He watched the snow pile up on the wagon wheels. "There's a man in Denver," Doc said. His voice was barely louder than the wind. "A lawyer, name of Greer. He sent a wire to the county courthouse yesterday, requesting the old files from Silver Falls." Caleb didn't flinch. He just stared out at the whiteout. He had been waiting for this. For 4 years, he knew the ghost was going to catch up. "My nephew is the court clerk," Doc continued. "He told me." Doc finally turned his head, looked at Caleb from under the brim of his snow-crusted hat. "That ain't all, Caleb. Clara Dunlop came to my office last week. The widow over on the ridge. She asked me if I remembered a man named Morrison, from back when I practiced in Oregon." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I told her I was just a doctor," Doc said softly. "I don't mind town politics. But Caleb, why is a quiet widow asking about a man who died in Oregon 4 years ago? And why is a Denver lawyer pulling your files?" Caleb didn't have an answer. Not one he could give. "Just watch your back, son," Doc said. He patted Caleb's arm, stepped off the porch, and climbed into his buggy. Caleb watched him ride away until the snow swallowed the wagon whole. That night the cabin was dead quiet. Lucy was asleep. The wind was screaming outside, battering the logs, but inside it was warm. Caleb sat at the kitchen table. The kerosene lamp turned all the way down to save oil. He had his ledger open, his pencil in his hand. But he wasn't writing. He was just staring at the blank page. He heard the floorboards creak. Eliza walked into the kitchen. She wore her heavy wool shawl over her nightdress. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders in dark, heavy waves. She didn't ask if she could sit. She just pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She folded her hands on the table, and she waited. They sat like that for 3 solid minutes. The only sound was the fire popping in the stove. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. The sharp line of her jaw, the dark, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He put his pencil down. "Do you want to know what I did in Silver Falls?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble. Eliza didn't look away. "Only if you want to tell me." "I don't want to," Caleb said honestly. "But I think the time for keeping quiet is up." He leaned back in his chair. He looked past her at the dark window pane, seeing something she couldn't. "His name was Robert Morrison." Eliza's hands tightened together, her knuckles turning white. She didn't say a word. "He was a land broker," Caleb said. "Charismatic, well-dressed. People liked him, but he was selling land he didn't own. Land that belonged to the Nez Perce. He forged the deeds. 20 Indian families bought them, thought they had a legal right to the valley. Then winter came, and the real owners showed up with the cavalry to push them out. Those families lost everything, their money, their winter camp. Some of them starved." Caleb swallowed. The memory was bitter. The town didn't care. They were Indians. The judge looked the other way. The sheriff went fishing. But I wore the badge. And a badge doesn't get to decide who is human and who isn't. He looked back at Eliza. "I went to his hotel room. I had an arrest warrant. I wrote it myself. When I read it to him, he laughed at me. He told me I was a fool protecting savages." Caleb's hands curled into loose fists on the table. "I put the irons on him. He fought back. We struggled near the door. He was heavier than me, but I was angry. I shoved him hard against the wall. He slipped, hit his head on the iron radiator. The cabin was so quiet, Eliza could hear her own heart beating in her ears. "He was bleeding," Caleb said softly. "Not bad. A cut above the ear. He was dizzy, but he was cursing me the whole way to the jailhouse. I locked him in the cell. I was so angry. I just walked out. I didn't get the doctor. I didn't check on him before I went home." Caleb closed his eyes, the weight of 4 years pressing down on his shoulders. "When I came back the next morning, he was on the floor. He couldn't stand up. 3 days later, he died." He opened his eyes. They were completely dry, just hollow. "The papers said I beat him to death. Half the town said I did right. The other half called me a butcher. They fired me, and then the town turned on Mary." His voice cracked on his wife's name. "The mercantile wouldn't sell her flour. Kids threw rocks at Lucy. We had to leave. We had to pack a wagon in the middle of the night and run. We came to Montana, but we were too late. The winter hit. I didn't have enough wood chopped. I didn't have enough blankets. Mary caught the fever." Caleb looked at Eliza, stripped bare. "I didn't murder Robert Morrison with my bare hands. I killed him with my anger and my pride. And I killed my wife with my cowardice because I ran instead of staying to fight. There are 2 deaths on my soul, Miss Marlowe, and I'll pay for them until they put me in the dirt." He was done. He didn't ask for pity. He didn't expect grace. Eliza sat there, the firelight dancing on her pale face. She couldn't cry. She had no right to cry in front of this man. She took a slow, deep breath. "You did the right thing," Eliza said. Her voice was trembling, but her words were like iron. "Those 20 families deserved the law to stand up for them. Robert was a thief." Caleb frowned slightly. "Robert, if you had checked on him," Eliza continued, her voice rising, urgent, "maybe he would have lived, but you didn't intend to kill him. You made a mistake while trying to do an honorable thing. I cannot forgive you. I don't have the authority, but I can tell you this. You have punished yourself enough. 4 years is enough." Caleb stared at her. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He played her words back in his head. Robert was a thief. Not Morrison. Not the man. Robert. She said it with an absolute bitter certainty. She said it like she knew the taste of his name, like she had said it 1,000 times before. Caleb leaned forward, very slowly. "You talk like a woman who knew him." Eliza froze. The air rushed out of her lungs. She looked at Caleb's eyes. He saw it. He saw right through the crack in her armor. She didn't try to lie. She didn't try to cover it up. She slowly stood up from the table, pulling her shawl tight across her chest. "I am going to bed," Eliza said softly. "Good night, Mr. Dunn." She walked to her room, closed the door. Caleb sat alone at the table. He picked up his heavy pencil. He opened the ledger to a blank page. He didn't write numbers. He wrote in the dark, heavy lead that he used for his own thoughts. "She knows his name. I didn't say his first name. She didn't ask. She just called him Robert, like he was sitting right here in the room with us." He stopped, pressed the pencil hard against the paper. "She came here because of him. I don't know who she really is. I know she isn't Eliza Marlowe." He looked up toward the closed door of the guest room. "And God help me. I know one more thing. I don't want her to leave." Monday morning. The sound of hooves on the frozen dirt. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Eliza was standing at the kitchen window, wiping down a cast-iron skillet. She stopped, looked out through the wavy glass. A man was riding up to the cabin. He rode tall in the saddle, gray wool coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the biting wind. And pinned to his chest, catching the pale morning light, was a silver star, a United States Marshal. Eliza's heart stopped, a cold, heavy stone dropping straight into her stomach. Caleb was already walking out of the barn. He didn't run. He didn't reach for the rifle leaning against the stable door. He just walked out, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. The marshal pulled back on the reins. The horse let out a long breath of white steam. Caleb Dunn? The marshal asked, his voice carried across the yard. Clear, professional. That's me, Caleb said. Eliza put the skillet down. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked out onto the porch. Lucy slipped out the door right behind her, grabbing hold of Eliza's skirt. The marshal reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a thick piece of folded paper. I'm Marshal Holbrook, up from Helena. I ain't here to arrest you, Mr. Dunn, but I've got a summons. He leaned down, handing the paper to Caleb. Judge Parsons is riding the circuit. He'll be holding court in Cedar Flat in 3 weeks. You're ordered to appear and give testimony regarding the death of Robert Morrison. If you don't show, then it becomes an arrest warrant. Caleb took the paper. His face was a mask of carved wood. Nothing moved. Who filed it? Caleb asked. His voice didn't shake. Holbrook looked at a small notebook he pulled from his breast pocket. A resident of Cedar Flat, a Mrs. Clara Dunlop. Holbrook flipped the page. Filing on behalf of the deceased, as his half-sister. On the porch, Eliza forgot how to breathe. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her apron, her mind spinning, fracturing. Clara Dunlop, the quiet widow, the woman who sat in the very next pew every single Sunday, the woman who had watched Eliza from the cemetery gate. Half-sister? Eliza didn't know. Robert was 15 years older than her. Her father had a life before her mother, a life Robert never spoke of, a life that apparently included a daughter. I'll be there, Caleb said. He folded the paper, shoved it in his coat pocket. Holbrook nodded, tipped his hat to Eliza, turned his horse, and rode back down the trail. Caleb stood in the yard for a long time, the wind picking up, whipping the dust around his boots. He finally turned. He looked at Eliza standing on the porch. He didn't ask her if she knew. He didn't have to. The shock on her face was real. Eliza didn't wait. As soon as Caleb took Lucy out to the pasture to check the fencing, Eliza grabbed her shawl. She walked. She didn't take the wagon. She walked the 2 miles across the ridge to the Dunlop place. The wind tore at her hair. Her boots crunched through the hardened, frosted mud. She felt like she was walking in a dream. A terrible, shifting dream where the ground kept giving way. She marched up to Clara's cabin. She didn't knock. Clara was on her porch, pinning wet laundry to a line strung between 2 wooden posts. Her hands were red from the cold. Clara didn't jump when Eliza walked up. She just stopped, pinned a white sheet to the wire, and turned around. You're Robert's sister, Eliza said. She was breathing hard, the cold air burning her lungs. Clara looked at her, calm, unbothered. And so are you, Clara said softly. 2 women, bound by blood, meeting for the very first time on a freezing ridge in the Montana Territory. I knew who you were the minute you stepped off that stagecoach, Clara said. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a folded, faded square of paper, a newspaper clipping. My mother kept this on her parlor table for 2 years, Clara said. The article you wrote in the Oregonian, she was so proud of you. Said you were the only one in the Morrison family who cared enough to fight for Robert's name. Eliza stared at the clipping, the ghost of her own words haunting her again. Why did you do it? Eliza asked. Her voice cracked. Why did you file the suit? I came here to find the truth. I've been watching him. I know, Clara said. I've been watching him, too, for 2 years. I moved here 6 months after he did, under my dead husband's name. I watched him build that fence. I watched his wife die. I watched him raise that little girl all by himself. Clara took a step forward, her dark eyes fierce. I already know the truth, Eliza. I know Caleb didn't murder our brother in cold blood. I know Robert was a swindler. I know it all. Then why, Eliza pleaded? If you know he's a good man, why drag him into court? Why risk sending him to prison? Clara's face hardened, a bitter, deep sorrow settling into the lines around her mouth. Because you came, Clara said. You came here, and you started living in his house. I saw the way that little girl looks at you. And I saw Caleb laugh last week at the mercantile. He laughed. Clara pointed a trembling finger toward the Dunn Ranch. Our brother is buried in a dirt grave in Oregon, without a headstone, without a funeral, because our family was too ashamed to claim the body. And the man who put him there gets to be happy? Gets to have a family? Have a wife? Clara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, spilling over onto her freezing cheeks. No, I don't want him in prison, Eliza. I want a reckoning. I want Caleb Dunn to stand up in front of a judge, in front of this whole town, and say Robert's name out loud. I want him to admit what happened. I want our brother to have a funeral, even if it's in a courtroom. Eliza stood frozen. She understood. God help her, she understood perfectly. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about grief. It was about a ghost that demanded to be seen. The trial happens, Clara whispered. I'll testify to his character. I'll tell the judge he's a good father, but he doesn't get to hide anymore, and neither do you. That night, the wind had died down. The cabin was suffocatingly quiet. Eliza sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the floor. Neither do you. Clara's words rang in her head like a church bell. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't wear the mask. She couldn't cook his food and look at his daughter and pretend she was just a lonely schoolteacher named Marlowe. She stood up, she walked out of her room, across the dark kitchen. She stood outside Caleb's door. Rule number 2, my door stays shut. Yours does too. She raised her hand. Her knuckles rapped gently against the rough wood. A moment later, the door opened. Caleb stood there. He was still in his trousers and a thermal shirt. He hadn't been sleeping. He looked at her, his eyes heavy, tired. He didn't ask what she wanted. He just stepped back, leaving the door open, inviting her in. She didn't walk far, just over the threshold. The room was cold, sparse, a bed, a washstand, nothing else. My name is not Eliza Marlowe, she said. She didn't whisper, she didn't cry. She said it straight. Caleb didn't move. He stood by the window, his arms crossed over his chest. I know, he said softly. Eliza swallowed. My name is Eliza Morrison. Robert was my brother. I wrote the article in the Oregonian that got you fired. I bought the debt on your land from the bank. I am the hidden creditor holding your mortgage. Lucy didn't write to me by mistake. I saw her advertisement and I used it to get inside your house. She laid it all out. Every ugly, rusted weapon she had brought with her, laid them right there on his bedroom floor. I came here to see if you were a monster, she finished, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I found out that I am. Silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a shotgun goes off, when your ears are ringing and the smoke is just starting to clear. Caleb looked out the window at the dark yard. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He didn't tell her to pack her bags, and that was worse. It was so much worse. I knew you weren't Marlowe, Caleb finally said. His voice was hollow, scraped out. I knew you had ties to him. I figured it out when you defended him. He slowly turned his head, looking at her. But I didn't know you wrote the words that sent my wife into the winter snow. Eliza closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't know he was lying until I found his ledgers. 2 years later, I didn't know. Doesn't matter, Caleb said. Words have weight, Miss Morrison. Once you put 'em out there, you can't ever call 'em back. He walked over to the door. He didn't look at her. He just looked at the wooden floorboards. Go to bed, he said. Caleb, go to bed, Eliza. She walked out. He closed the door behind her. The click of the iron latch sounded louder than a thunderclap. She stood in the dark kitchen, entirely alone. Morning came, because it always does. Caleb sat at the kitchen table. He was drinking his coffee. Eliza was at the stove, flipping flapjacks. Lucy was sitting between them, swinging her legs under the chair, completely oblivious to the wreckage around her. Papa, can we practice roping today? Lucy asked, her mouth full of syrup. Maybe later, little bird, Caleb said. His voice was gentle for her. Only for her. He didn't look at Eliza. He didn't ask her for a second cup of coffee. He took his plate, ate in 3 bites, and walked out to the barn. The air between them was a frozen lake. You could walk on it, but you knew there was black, freezing water just an inch below the ice. 3 days passed like that, working side by side, never touching, never speaking, unless it was necessary, but the trial was coming. On Thursday night, Caleb brought his small lockbox out to the kitchen table. He opened it, pulled out his copy of the original arrest warrant, the coroner's report from Silver Falls. He laid them out, staring at them in the dim lamplight. Eliza watched him from the sink. She dried her hands. She walked over. She didn't ask for permission. She pulled out a chair and sat down. She reached out and turned the coroner's report toward her. "You need Doc Harlan to swear to this," Eliza said, tapping a line on the page. "Right here, where it says Robert had a history of heart palpitations. It proves the fall didn't kill him instantly. The shock on his heart did." Caleb looked at her finger, then looked at her face. "I can draft the questions for the judge," she continued. Her voice was pure business. "I used to do legal filing. I know how they talk. I know what Parsons is going to ask you." Caleb leaned back. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low, rough. "You came to ruin me. Now you want to save me?" "I told you," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "I owe you for Mary. I can't bring her back. But I'll be damned if I let you go to prison for something my brother started. You're going to stand up in that courtroom, and I'm going to make sure you walk out." Caleb stared at her. A long, unreadable look. Then he reached over, slid the arrest warrant across the table toward her. "Fine," he said. "Draft the questions." They worked, night after night. They didn't forgive each other. They didn't apologize anymore. They just put their heads down and built a wall of paper and ink to protect his life. It felt like a truce, a fragile, desperate truce. Until Tuesday night. It was past midnight. They had just blown out the lamp. Caleb was in his room. Eliza was in hers. Then came the scream. Not a human scream. A high, terrified, ear-piercing shriek. Horses. Caleb threw his door open. He was in his boots before his brain even caught up. He rushed out to the kitchen. Eliza was already there, throwing her shawl over her shoulders. Outside the window, the night wasn't black anymore. It was glowing, a violent, hungry orange. "The barn!" Caleb shouted. He burst through the front door. The heat hit him instantly. The barn wasn't just burning, it was a roaring 50-foot bonfire, the flames licking up into the black sky. And right next to it, the hayrick. 60% of his winter feed. Gone. Engulfed in a matter of seconds. "Papa!" Lucy was standing on the porch, clutching her blanket, her eyes wide with terror. "Get her inside!" Caleb yelled at Eliza. "Keep her away from the windows!" Caleb grabbed a burlap sack, dunked it in the horse trough, and ran toward the flames. He couldn't save the hay, he knew that. He just needed to get the horses out. He kicked the side door of the barn open. The smoke was a solid wall, black and thick. He tied the wet sack around his mouth and nose, dived in. He found the stalls, fumbled with the latches. The heat was blistering his skin. His eyes watered so hard he was blind. He slapped the rump of the roan mare. "Go, get out!" The horses bolted past him, terrified, straight out into the yard. Caleb stumbled out right behind them, collapsing onto the cold dirt, coughing up black soot. Jesse Ward, the young farmhand from the next ridge, came galloping into the yard. Then Doc Harlan in his buggy. Even Clara Dunlop came running through the brush with 2 wooden buckets. They formed a line, passing buckets from the creek. But it was useless. They weren't fighting to save the barn anymore. They were fighting to keep the sparks off the cabin roof. By 3 in the morning, it was over. Nothing left but glowing embers, charred black beams pointing up at the sky like broken ribs. Caleb stood in front of the ruins. His face was covered in ash. His coat was singed. His hands were burned and blistered. He smelled it, through the smoke and the ash. Kerosene. Someone had doused the hay. Someone had made sure it burned hot and fast. Banker Harrison. It was a message. Pay the note or lose it all. And without that hay, the cattle would starve before January. He was ruined. Completely, utterly ruined. Eliza walked up beside him. She handed him a damp rag. He didn't take it. He just stared at the glowing coals. "I'm done," Caleb whispered. The words broke Eliza's heart. She had seen this man take the hatred of a whole town. She had seen him bury his wife. She had seen him carry the weight of the world. And right now, standing in the ashes, his shoulders finally slumped. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Caleb said, his voice completely dead. "I'll sell the herd for whatever I can get. Pay Harrison his blood money. Maybe I'll have enough left to buy 2 tickets to California. Try again." "No," Eliza said. Caleb didn't look at her. "There's no hay, Eliza. The cows drop dead in 3 weeks without feed. It's over." "No, it isn't." By dawn, the ashes were still smoking. Caleb was asleep in the chair by the dead stove, exhausted. Eliza didn't sleep. She didn't even change her soot-stained dress. She walked into town. The sun was just coming up. The streets of Cedar Flat were empty and quiet. She walked straight to the telegraph office. She woke the operator up by banging on the glass. She walked in, pulled 2 blank forms toward her, picked up the pencil. She wasn't Eliza Marlowe, the quiet schoolteacher, anymore. She was Eliza Morrison. She was a woman who knew the law, and she knew how to use it. On the first form, she wired Greer in Denver. "File formal complaint against First Bank of Cedar Flat. Director Harrison, usury and fraudulent ledger practices. Send federal auditor immediately. Have evidence in hand." On the second form, she wired the First National Bank of Portland. She took a deep breath. She knew what she was about to do was a massive violation of Caleb's trust. But sometimes you have to break a man's pride to save his life. "As primary lien holder on the Dunn estate, I am executing an emergency draw of $500 from the state settlement account of Caleb Dunn. Wire funds directly to Benson Ranch, Montana Territory, earmarked winter hay." She slammed the papers down on the counter, paid the operator with the last of her own money. "Send them," she said. "Now." That evening, Caleb was sitting on the back porch, wrapping his burned hands in clean gauze. He heard the wagons before he saw them, 3 heavy flatbeds pulled by draft horses, rolling up his driveway, loaded to the sky with fresh golden winter hay. Old Man Benson was driving the lead wagon. He pulled up to the porch, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Where you want 'em, Dunn?" Benson hollered. "Paid in full, $500. Enough to get your herd to April." Caleb stood up. He looked at the hay. He looked at Benson. "I didn't order this," Caleb said. "No," a voice said from behind him. Caleb turned. Eliza was standing in the doorway. "I did," she said. Caleb stared at her, his mind working frantically. "With what money? You don't have $500. "I don't," Eliza said calmly. "You do." Caleb froze, the realization hitting him like a physical punch. "Portland," he breathed. "I wired the bank this morning," she said. She didn't back down. She stood tall. "I am your primary creditor. The law gives me the right to access your assets to secure the property in an emergency. I transferred $500 to Benson." Caleb's face turned white, then a dark, furious red. He stepped toward her, towering over her. "You stole from me," he snarled. "You touched money you had no right to touch." "I touched money that belongs to you," Eliza fired back, her own anger flaring up. "I used the money you were too stubborn to use. It bought hay. It bought your cattle's lives. It bought your daughter a home for the winter." "It's blood money," Caleb yelled, the first time he had ever raised his voice to her. "It's survival," Eliza shouted right back. "You don't get to lay down and die, Caleb Dunn. You don't get to sell this land and run away just because you want to keep punishing yourself." They stood inches apart, chests heaving, the anger radiating off both of them. "You had no right," Caleb said, his voice shaking with rage. "I took the right," Eliza said softly, her eyes blazing. "You can hate me for it. You can throw me out when this is over, but Harrison doesn't win today, and neither does your pride." Caleb stared at her. He looked at the wagons of hay. He looked at the fierce, unyielding woman standing in his doorway. He turned around, walked down the steps. "Stack it by the corral," he yelled to Benson. He didn't look back at Eliza. He didn't say thank you. But as he grabbed a pitchfork with his bandaged hands, he knew he was tied to her now, for better or for worse. The trial was 3 days away, and they were going to walk into that courtroom together. The Cedar Flat Church wasn't built for a trial. It was a small room, pine walls, hard benches. But on that Thursday morning, it held the entire town. Standing room only. Judge Parsons sat at the preacher's pulpit. He was an old circuit judge, face like a dried apple. He didn't use a gavel. He just tapped his knuckles on the wood, and the room went dead silent. Clara Dunlop was called first. She walked to the front in her black widow's dress. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight at Caleb. "State your name and relation," the judge said. "Clara Dunlop," she answered, her voice carried. "My maiden name was Morrison. Robert Morrison was my half-brother." A ripple of whispers washed over the pews. The judge tapped his knuckles again. "Tell the court why we're here, Mrs. Dunlop." Clara took a deep breath. "I came here to speak my brother's name because no one else would." She turned, looking out at the faces of Cedar Flat. "My brother was a swindler. He robbed 20 Indian families of their land. He was arrested, and he died in a jail cell. And the man who arrested him has been paying for it ever since." She turned back to Judge Parsons. "I don't want Caleb Dunn hanged. I don't want him in a cell. I have watched him for 2 years. He's a good father, he's a good neighbor, but he is a man hiding from his own shadow. I brought this suit because the truth needs to be spoken in the light of day. Robert was wrong, he paid for it. Caleb was wrong, he paid for it too. I just want us all to finally admit it." She stepped down. The room was so quiet you could hear the wind scraping against the window panes. Then it was Caleb's turn. He stood up. He walked to the front. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at Eliza, who was sitting in the front row holding Lucy's hand. He looked at the judge. "Mr. Dunn," Parsons said, "you heard the claim. What do you have to say for yourself?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "I arrested Robert Morrison on November 3rd, 1879. I was angry when I did it. I was disgusted by what he had done to those families. When he fought me, I threw him against the wall. He hit his head." Caleb paused. He swallowed the dryness in his throat. "I locked the door, and I walked away. I didn't check his wound. I didn't call the doctor. If I had, maybe he would have lived. I don't know." He turned. He looked at Clara. Then he looked at Eliza. "I did not intend to kill him, but my anger and my negligence let him die. I am sorry to his family. I am sorry to his sisters. Robert Morrison was a thief, but he didn't deserve to die on a cold floor because a deputy lost his temper. That is the truth, and I will carry it until the day I die." He stood there, stripped entirely bare. Judge Parsons looked at his notes. He looked at Doc Harlan's medical report detailing Morrison's weak heart. Then he looked at Caleb. "A badge is a heavy piece of tin, Mr. Dunn," the judge said slowly. "It requires a man to be better than his basest instincts. You failed that requirement." Caleb nodded. "I did, Your Honor. But," the judge continued, his voice rising, "negligence in a scuffle with a resisting suspect does not equate to the crime of murder. Not in this territory. The medical evidence shows a pre-existing condition. The testimony shows a lack of malice aforethought." The judge closed his ledger. "Case dismissed. Mr. Dunn, you are cleared by the law." The town let out a collective breath. But Parsons wasn't finished. He leaned over the pulpit, pointed a crooked finger at Caleb. "You are cleared by the law, son. But the law can't clear your conscience. That burden is yours to carry. I suggest you figure out how to put it down before it breaks your back." Caleb nodded once. He stepped down. Clara walked up to him. She didn't smile, but she held out her hand. Caleb took it. A firm, silent shake. It was over. But it wasn't. They rode back to the ranch in the wagon. The sky was iron gray. The air smelled like coming snow. Eliza felt a strange, light feeling in her chest. The trial was done. The hay was stacked. They had survived. They walked into the cabin. Caleb took off his coat. He walked over to his lockbox to file away the court dismissal papers. He opened the box. He pulled out the telegraph receipt from the bank transfer, the one Eliza had shoved in there 3 days ago. He hadn't really looked at it, not until now. He stared at the numbers. He stared for a long time. His shoulders went rigid. He turned around. "Eliza," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. Eliza stopped taking off her shawl. "Yes?" Caleb held up the receipt. "The hay was $500, he said. "Yes," she replied. "This receipt is for $2,000. Eliza lifted her chin. She didn't back away. "I know." "Where is the rest of it, Eliza?" "I wired it to a federal trust in Oregon, set up for the 20 Nez Perce families that Robert defrauded. It's gone, Caleb, all of it." The silence in the cabin shattered. Caleb threw the paper onto the table. "You had no right," he roared. It wasn't a disagreement. It was an explosion. "That was my money. It was my account." "It was blood money," Eliza fired back, matching his volume, matching his fury. "You said it yourself. You were never going to touch it. You were going to let it rot in a vault while you starved." "It was my choice to make," Caleb yelled, stepping toward her. "You don't get to decide my redemption for me, Eliza. You don't get to play God with my conscience." "Someone had to," she screamed, her chest heaving. "Because you were going to carry it into the ground. You were going to let that guilt kill you, just like it killed Mary." Caleb stopped, like he had been shot. Eliza didn't stop. She pushed forward. "That money belonged to the people my brother destroyed. The people you threw away your badge to protect. It's back where it belongs. Now neither of us has to look at it ever again." They stood there, chest to chest, breathing hard. Two people who had been broken by the exact same tragedy. "You lied to me for months," Caleb said, his voice shaking. "I did," she said. "You came here to destroy my life." "I did. And then you gave away everything I had left." "Yes." Caleb stared at her fiercely. "Tell me one good reason why I shouldn't put you on the next stagecoach to Denver." Eliza looked right back into his eyes. "Because you know I'm right," she whispered. "And because I'm the only person in the world who knows exactly how heavy your ghosts are. Because I'm carrying them too." Caleb's jaw clenched. He looked at her. Really looked at her. He didn't have an argument left. He was empty. Stripped of his guilt. Stripped of his money. Stripped of his secrets. He turned around. He walked out the back door into the freezing cold. He stayed out there for hours. A week passed. The snow finally came. A thick, heavy blanket that covered the charred remains of the barn, covered the dead grass, covered the dirt. It was Monday morning. Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table. He had his pencil. He had his ledger. He heard footsteps. Eliza walked into the room. She didn't have a coffee cup this time. She had her brown leather journal. She sat down across from him. She opened the journal, and right there in front of him, she gripped the pages filled with her notes, her anger, her plans to ruin him. She ripped them out, all of them. She walked over to the wood stove, opened the iron door, and threw the pages into the fire. She watched them burn. Then she walked back to the table. She sat down. She took a pen from her pocket. She dipped it in the inkwell. She turned to a fresh blank page in the journal, and she wrote. She pushed the book across the table. Caleb looked down, written in dark, permanent ink. "I, Eliza Morrison, choose to stay in Cedar Flat, Montana. I do not promise happiness. I do not promise immediate forgiveness. I promise my presence every single day, until one of us can no longer stay." She signed it, Eliza Morrison. Caleb read the words. He read them 3 times. He looked up at her. Her face was calm, resolute. He didn't reach for his pencil. He reached across the table. He took her pen. He dipped it in the ink. Below her name, he wrote, "I, Caleb Dunn, accept your vow, and I add mine. I will try to stop punishing myself. I will try to learn how to receive grace. I will try not to hold your lies against you forever. I do not promise to love you today. I promise to try. He signed it. Caleb Dunn. He closed the book. He didn't reach across the table to hold her hand. They didn't kiss. They didn't fall into each other's arms. They just sat there, together, breathing the same air. An hour later, Caleb put on his heavy coat. He stepped out the back door. The snow was falling lightly. He walked around the smokehouse. He stopped. He wasn't alone. Eliza was standing there, wearing her heavy wool shawl. And standing between them was Lucy. The little girl was bundled up in a thick coat. In her mittened hands, she held 3 dried winter wildflowers. Caleb walked up. He stood next to Eliza. Lucy stepped forward. She placed the flowers on the snow-covered stone. "Mama," the little girl said, her breath pluming white in the air. "I brought Eliza. I don't know if she's going to be my new mama yet, but she's going to stay." Lucy patted the top of the headstone, brushing away a flake of snow. "And if she stays, I promise I won't ever forget you. Amen." Caleb closed his eyes. The tears finally came, not tears of grief, tears of release. He felt a hand slip into his coat pocket. Small, warm. It was Lucy's hand. Then he felt another hand slide into his other pocket. Eliza's hand. He gripped them both, hard. They stood there in the quiet. 3 broken pieces fitting together to make something whole. The story you are about to read is entirely fictional. While it may draw inspiration from universal human experiences, it does not depict real people or actual events. Any perceived parallels are coincidental and should not be interpreted as deliberate representations.
Out here in the wide, unforgiving West, people like to believe that strength is measured by how much a man can endure in silence. Caleb Dunn believed that too. He buried his grief, punished himself for his past, and tried to raise his daughter with nothing but grit and a promise. And Eliza Morrison, she carried a different kind of weight, the kind built from anger, loss, and a truth she thought she already understood. But this story was never really about who was right or wrong. It was about what happens when 2 broken people are forced to face not just each other, but themselves. What this story leaves us with is a quiet, powerful truth. Pain does not make us villains, and mistakes do not define the entirety of who we are. Caleb spent years believing he deserved to suffer, refusing even the chance to rebuild his life because he thought redemption had a price he could never pay. Eliza, on the other hand, believed justice meant destruction, until she realized that her own actions had caused more harm than the man she came to condemn. And somewhere in between them stood Lucy, a child whose simple faith and innocent love became the bridge neither of them knew they needed. There is a lesson here about forgiveness, but not the easy kind, not the kind where everything is forgotten and washed clean overnight. This is the hard kind of forgiveness, the kind that begins with truth, the kind that forces you to look at your own reflection and admit where you were wrong. Caleb had to accept that he could not spend his life paying for the past by destroying his future. Eliza had to accept that justice without compassion becomes cruelty, and both of them had to learn that healing doesn't come from running away or from holding on to anger, but from choosing, every single day, to do something better than what came before. The story also reminds us of something simple, but often overlooked, that love, in its truest form, is not loud. It doesn't arrive perfectly. It doesn't fix everything at once. Sometimes it looks like a cup of hot coffee held out in silence. Sometimes it's a pair of careful hands braiding a child's hair. Sometimes it's the courage to stay, even when leaving would be easier. In a land as harsh as the frontier, those small acts of care are what keep people alive, not just in body, but in spirit. And perhaps the most important truth of all is this: no one is beyond redemption, But redemption requires honesty. It requires facing the past without hiding and stepping forward without pride getting in the way. The West has always been a place of second chances, but only for those willing to earn them. So when you walk away from this story, remember this: we are all carrying something. Regret, guilt, loss, anger, but also hope. And sometimes the very thing we fear, the stranger at the door, the truth we've avoided, is the beginning of the life we were meant to live. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, then you already understand its value.